we're going to meet their grandson, Damian Darmanin, who's an artist, and he's going to introduce us to some of his amazing art.
Everyone's not interested in castles or fantasy anymore. What has happened? So I said, if I can't do it physically, I'll do it in this way. So I did it. Basically, I'm coming up with castles in this way because I feel this is the way forward.
Well, I suppose his inspiration comes from the fact that he's a searcher. He wants to look and create something which is different, and in a way he's chosen a medium which is collage. Collage is a form of making art when you glue things. It actually comes, the word collage comes from the French coller, which means to glue. The art itself started probably about 2,000 years ago in China. Got lost all over the centuries and was revived very much in the 60s. In the 60s we had pop artists like Hamilton and most of all Peter Blake, and the most famous collage image probably is the Beatles LP 1967, Sgt. Pepper's Band Club. And that became an iconic sort of collage image. In the case of Damian's work, I think what he's doing, in a way he's a paper architect. While in my profession I looked back at the vernacular architecture of Malta and the stratification of all the layers of our mnemonic retention, which is so rich of our island, and I tried to translate that into a contemporary architectural vision of which belonged to place but also belonged to time. I think in his case what he's doing is he's taking the contemporary and looking into the future. So it's a leap of time, and most of the images which he transcends from parts, because the interesting thing is that at the end the image itself, which is made up of particles chosen by a very sensitive eye, the sum of the parts is actually much more than the actual sum itself. It's an image which creates something which looks to the future, which has an image and an identity which is not visible in the individual parts. So he's a seeker. He's a person who has to have a tremendous sense of actually finding these images. But the really interesting thing from my point of view is that he is creating from images which are real. So he's taking a reality and he's transposing that reality into a virtual reality, which is the reverse of what we do as architects, because we start off with a virtual image and then we end up with a manifest building. So in his particular case, he's sort of reversing my methodology of how I would produce a building, which of course I always find that if you actually endorse yourself into a vision where you look at what is not what you do, but the reverse of what you do, you tend to understand even more what you're doing. So I find his work extremely interesting. Of course, initially my first reaction was almost a very subjective one. Obviously, a grandson who's launching himself into the world of art, which is very much my world, and so in a way it was almost a form of nepotism, obviously not being too critical. With the passage of time, I realized that it was extremely important for me to sort of detach myself from the grandpaternal sort of relationship, and to look at this from a purely objective point of view and from a critical point of view. And I'm pleased to say that not only has his work passed the tests, but I'm extremely proud of him, and because the work has, I think, an essential quality.
I was looking at Nannu's formula of work one night and I was saying, this is awesome work. I've lived with Nannu's work for a long time. And one night I was just staring at it, I said, this can be done with photographs, easy peasy. So I went home, tested it, basically on Malta Baroque churches.
I remember when he was 4 years old, he told me, we were sitting in the breakfast room and there was his grandfather, Richard, we know what he's all about. There was his mother, there was Mark, my son, and there was me in the middle. And Damian turns to me and he says, Nanna, draw car. And I thought to myself, of all these artistic people, he asks me. So I got a piece of paper and I drew a car, which was like this, like this, like this, with 2 tires, you know, and that's all. Bad, he told me. And even within the family, I felt really sort of bad, you know, pretty bad myself. So he said, again. So I did it again, this time he told me, better. What I really want to say is Damian has had art in his heart.
Well, I don't know if I guided him. I suppose he says that my work has been an inspiration. It isn't that I've held his hand and pulled him through all the... I have looked at his work and I have occasionally said, you know, this could be better or this could be worse if you did it this way. But I think the credit is entirely his. I've no doubt about that. Well, I suppose you become what you behold. I mean, as William Blake tells us. So if you grow up in an atmosphere where there is art around you, and of course he's had my own influence, he's had my wife's influence with her Ricabana, he's had his mother's influence as an iconographer, and of course his uncle's Mark, my son again, who's an artist whose work I greatly admire. So I think if you take all those sort of worlds which he's grown up with, and he actually grew up in a house which I had designed, and I remember when he was at the early age of 6 or 7, I had already used some of his drawings as Christmas cards. He had produced a series of churches, and also I had specially designed for him a castle for Damian, which in a way is a precursor of some of the forms which I now see many years later in his works.
I'm doing it by hand. I'm cutting out buildings and just giving it the basic feel and the virtual essence it needs.
When you pick up all those parts, it's not easy to actually select what you are going to use and what you are going to leave out. And I think that is the real essence of his work. It's the selectivity. So you really have to be extremely careful, because the images are multiple, the millions of images he can pick out. And then to be able to sieve through those images and actually come up with a composition means that in his mind the image is already set. And so that also is indicative that he is an artist of a certain quality. Whether you like it or not, what you live with, in fact, actually influences, because it's only what you take in that you can then give out. So I'm sure that the ambiences of Malta and the environments which he has lived through are actually very much part of his inspirational works. He's had publications in one of the top Italian magazines, which is L'Arca, and the editor Cesare Casati was very complimentary and gave him a 3 or 4 page coverage, so that was very good. The American Polish architect Daniel Liebeskind is also a great admirer of his work, and the response so far has been extremely positive, and I think that's a good stepping stone to getting complete international recognition.
I feel that Damian will go a long way, because Damian is focused. Damian is not a butterfly mind. David will not be thinking of something else other than what he's doing.
What I've done is changed a few things. It's surreal. All right, I may not be drawing it myself, but what I've done is hassled enough to think up the idea, and you're not going to find it anywhere else.